Do not help me up yet. Keep every camera exactly where it is. Dr. Renee Whitaker's voice rose through the stunned courtroom with a calm that seemed impossible in the moment. Chairs had shifted. Lawyers were standing. The bailiff was already moving toward Officer Mark Dalton, while Judge Evelyn Hart struck her gavel and ordered everyone to remain still. Renee stayed beside the witness stand, one hand resting against the polished wooden rail as she steadied herself. She did not shout. She did not move toward Dalton. She looked past him to Amanda Price, the court reporter, whose fingers hovered above the keyboard. Please mark the exact time, Renee said. Record the officer's words, his movement from counsel table, and the fact that his body camera is still active. Amanda glanced at the red light on Dalton's chest, then began typing. The soft rhythm of the keys became the only sound in the room. Dalton stood several feet away, breathing heavily, his expression caught between anger and disbelief. Court security positioned itself between them. At the plaintiff's table, 19-year-old Caleb Turner stared at Renee with both hands pressed against the edge of the desk. He had spent nearly 2 years waiting for someone to prove that the official report about his arrest was false. Now the officer who wrote it had lost control in front of a judge, a jury, and 3 cameras. Thomas Keene, the city attorney, rose beside Dalton. Your Honor, my client should be removed immediately. Renee raised one finger toward the clerk's desk. Exhibit 62. The number changed Dalton's face. His eyes moved toward the silver evidence case beneath the plaintiff's table, then toward Special Agent Olivia Grant in the last row. For the first time that morning, he looked afraid of something larger than the room. Judge Hart leaned forward. Dr. Whitaker, this court has not admitted Exhibit 62. Not yet, Your Honor, Renee said. But Officer Dalton has now completed the foundation through his sworn testimony and his conduct before this court. Keene objected before she finished. That is an outrageous characterization. Renee turned toward Amanda. Please read back, officer. Dalton's last 5 answers. Amanda reviewed the transcript. The witness stated that no additional body camera recording existed, that he did not access the evidence server, that his credentials were never compromised, that he did not ask a technician to alter the file, and that his report fully described the encounter. Renee nodded once. 5 answers. 5 fixed points in a record Dalton could no longer rewrite. At the rear doors, a federal marshal entered beside Marcus Lee, the police department systems engineer whose absence had allowed Keene to challenge the evidence earlier. Marcus carried a sealed forensic report and looked directly at Dalton. The officer's shoulders lowered as recognition replaced anger. Renee opened the silver case and removed a small evidence pouch marked with a federal preservation number. Your Honor, Mr. Lee is prepared to authenticate the original server image, the matching digital hash, and the command that hid 9 minutes of video from the visible case file. The jury turned toward Dalton. Keene stopped writing. Even Judge Hart held the gavel without moving. Renee looked at the clerk again, her fingers still raised. One motion, she said. Publish the exhibit after authentication. Dalton had believed one reckless moment could knock the truth from the stand. He had no idea the truth had already been copied, sealed, and brought into the courtroom with a chain of custody he could never break. 90 minutes earlier, Caleb Turner sat at the plaintiff's table with a folded scholarship letter resting beneath his hands. The paper had arrived 11 months after his arrest and carried the kind of language institutions used when they wanted consequences to sound temporary. His athletic scholarship had been suspended pending review. His place at Northbridge State University had been deferred. His name remained attached to an incident report describing him as aggressive, evasive, and unwilling to follow lawful instructions. Caleb was 19 years old when Officer Mark Dalton stopped him outside a convenience store near campus. The actual suspect had been described as a man in his late 20s wearing a red jacket and driving a dark sedan. Caleb wore a gray college sweatshirt, carried a backpack, and had arrived on foot. The charges were dropped within 4 days, but the report survived. Photographs spread online. Coaches stopped returning calls. People who had never met him began speaking about his future in the past tense. Now, inside a cold county courtroom, Caleb watched Dalton enter in a perfectly pressed uniform with his badge polished beneath the overhead lights. Dalton moved with the confidence of a man who believed the room would trust the uniform before hearing the evidence. Thomas Keene walked beside him carrying 3 organized binders and a legal pad already divided into sections. At the far end of the gallery, Special Agent Olivia Grant sat alone in a charcoal suit, appearing to be another attorney waiting for a later matter. She kept a closed folder on her lap and never looked directly at Dalton. Dr. Renee Whitaker waited outside the rail with a compact silver evidence case beside her chair. She wore a tailored navy suit, a cream blouse, and a calm expression that gave Caleb no clue whether the morning was going well or badly. On the yellow legal pad in her hand, she had written only 6 lines. 5 were questions. The 6th was an exhibit number. Judge Evelyn Hart entered at 9 o'clock, and the courtroom rose. After preliminary arguments, Thomas Keene presented the city's version of the arrest. He described a rapidly developing situation, an uncertain suspect description, and an officer forced to make a difficult decision in seconds. Dalton sat beside him without expression. When Caleb's attorney challenged the report, Keene displayed 17 minutes of body camera footage. The recording showed Dalton approaching Caleb, demanding identification, and instructing him to remain near the storefront. Then the file ended abruptly. Keene told the jury that the camera had stopped recording because of a routine transfer error. Caleb leaned toward Renee as she took her seat near the witness area. "That is not where it ended," he whispered. "I know," she said. "The server knows too." Judge Hart called Renee as an expert in digital evidence auditing. She took the oath, stated her qualifications, and explained how body camera files were generated, uploaded, indexed, and preserved. Her voice was steady and free of drama. She testified that Dalton's camera had created 2 connected files that evening. The city had produced the first. The second lasted 9 minutes and no longer appeared in the visible case folder. Keene rose immediately. "Objection. The witness is describing a file that has not been authenticated." Judge Hart looked toward Renee. "Can you establish, from your own examination, that the file was not corrupted?" "Yes, Your Honor. The original data remained intact. The file was hidden from the case interface, not destroyed." A quiet shift moved through the jury box. Keene objected again, arguing that the forensic server copy had been created by a systems engineer who was not present in court. Judge Hart sustained the objection and instructed Renee not to describe the file's contents until the chain of custody had been established. Dalton looked toward Caleb and allowed himself the faintest smile. Caleb lowered his eyes to the scholarship letter. Then he noticed Renee writing beneath his legal pad. She turned it toward him. "Only if he stops talking," she had written. Across the room, Dalton adjusted his badge, unaware that the missing witness was already walking toward the courthouse with a federal marshal. Judge Hart allowed Renee to continue, but only within the narrow boundaries of what she had personally verified. That limitation pleased Thomas Keene. He returned to his chair with the controlled confidence of a lawyer who believed the most dangerous evidence had just been pushed outside the courtroom. Renee adjusted the microphone and looked toward the jury. "A digital evidence system records more than video," she said. "It records when a device begins capturing, when a file reaches the server, when someone opens it, and when its status changes." Keene rose again. "Objection to any reference to unidentified users." "Sustained," Judge Hart said. "Dr. Whitaker may explain the system, but she may not identify an individual without authentication." Renee nodded. The camera assigned to Officer Dalton began recording at 8:42 in the evening. The first file reached the department server at 9:18. A second connected file arrived 11 seconds later. She explained that the second file shared the same device number, shift identifier, case number, and continuous internal clock. It was not a separate incident. It was the missing end of the same encounter. On the screen beside the jury, she displayed a clean timeline without showing the disputed footage. The first segment lasted 17 minutes. The second lasted 9 minutes and 12 seconds. Together, they formed one uninterrupted recording. Caleb stared at the blank space representing the hidden file. Those 9 minutes contained the moment dispatch confirmed that the actual suspect had already been detained 2 miles away. They also contained Dalton's decision to keep questioning Caleb after that confirmation. Keene approached the witness stand. "You have not viewed an authenticated copy of this second file in this courtroom, correct?" "Not in this courtroom," Renee answered. "And the engineer who created the forensic copy is not presently seated at the witness table?" "Not presently." "Then the jury has no lawful basis to assume the file contains anything favorable to Mr. Turner." Renee met his eyes. The jury does not need to assume what the file contains to understand that someone changed its visibility. Keene stopped for half a second. Someone. The server recorded a manual status command at 2:13 the following morning. The command did not delete the file. It removed the file from the case interface used by prosecutors, defense counsel, and internal reviewers. A murmur passed through the gallery. Judge Hart raised the gavel, and silence returned. Keene asked whether automated maintenance could have caused the change. Renee said no. He asked whether a software error could explain it. She said the system required an authenticated user session. He asked whether the command might have been part of a routine privacy review. Renee explained that privacy restrictions left an audit note and required supervisory approval. Neither appeared here. Dalton shifted in his chair for the first time. Renee noticed, but she did not look at him. She continued describing the sequence. At 2:11, a department account opened Caleb's case. At 2:12, that account viewed both files. At 2:13, the second file was marked hidden. At 2:19, Dalton's written report was reopened. At 2:34, the report was saved with a new sentence claiming the camera had stopped before dispatch delivered any updated suspect information. Keene objected before Renee could say more. Judge Hart sustained him and reminded the jury that the identity behind the account had not been established. The restriction made the evidence sound incomplete, exactly as Keene intended. Caleb's attorney requested permission to call Marcus Lee immediately. The clerk checked the hallway and reported that he had not yet arrived. Judge Hart announced that the court would proceed without the server image unless the proper foundation could be established before the close of testimony. Dalton leaned back. The faint smile returned. Renee lowered her eyes to the 6 lines on her legal pad. The technical door had closed for the moment, but another door remained open. She turned toward Dalton and said, "Officer, I would like to ask you about your own account access." Dalton turned toward Renee with the confidence of a man who believed the missing witness had already decided the case for him. Judge Hart reminded the jury that Renee was still under examination and instructed her to limit every question to matters within the admitted record. Thomas Keene stood beside the defense table, prepared to object before any answer became dangerous. Renee glanced at the 6 lines on her legal pad, then closed the cover. She no longer needed to read them. "Officer Dalton, you were assigned a department account when you joined the evidence management system, correct?" Dalton answered yes. "That account required a password and a department-issued security token?" "Yes." "You were instructed never to share either one." "Correct." His voice was steady. Keene watched Renee closely, expecting her to return to the excluded audit log. Instead, she asked about ordinary procedure. Dalton explained that officers used their accounts to review video, complete reports, and respond to requests from supervisors. Renee asked whether the system displayed the name of the signed-in user. He said it did. She asked whether officers were responsible for activity completed under their credentials. He agreed, then added that technology could make mistakes. "Has your department ever notified you that your account was compromised?" Renee asked. Dalton looked toward Keene before answering. "No." "Have you ever reported your password or security token missing?" "No." "Did you give another employee permission to use your account on the night Caleb Turner was arrested?" "No." Each answer sounded harmless by itself. Together, they began closing every exit. Keene rose. "Your Honor, this is approaching the same evidence the court excluded." Judge Hart considered the objection. Dr. Whitaker may ask about the witness's practices, but she may not describe the disputed server record. Renee nodded and continued. "Officer Dalton, when did you complete your report?" "Before the end of my shift." "Did you reopen it later?" "Not that I remember." "Did you ask anyone in the technology unit to change the visibility of your body camera files?" Dalton's jaw tightened. "Absolutely not." The certainty in his voice reached every corner of the room. Amanda Price captured it without looking up. Renee allowed 3 seconds of silence before asking the next question. "At the time you signed the final report, did you believe it fully described the encounter with Caleb Turner?" "Yes." Caleb stared at the scholarship letter beneath his hands. He could hear Dalton rebuilding the same story that had followed him through disciplinary hearings, campus meetings, and unanswered telephone calls. The difference was that this version was being spoken under oath. Keene rose again and asked the judge to end the line of questioning. He argued that Renee was using unsupported technical claims to suggest misconduct the jury had not been permitted to examine. Judge Hart agreed that the foundation remained incomplete. She directed Renee to move away from the server activity until Marcus Lee appeared. For the first time that morning, the room seemed to tilt toward Dalton. Keene returned to his table with visible relief. Dalton leaned back and folded his hands. One juror stopped taking notes. Another looked toward the clock. Caleb wrote a question on the corner of his legal pad and slid it toward his attorney. "Are we losing?" His attorney did not answer. Renee saw the words from the witness stand. She asked Judge Hart for permission to review one document already admitted into evidence. While the clerk retrieved it, Renee wrote beneath Caleb's question and turned the page just enough for him to see. "Only if he stops talking." At the rear of the courtroom, Olivia Grant checked her telephone. A single message appeared from the federal marshal downstairs. Marcus Lee had entered the building. Renee looked at Dalton, who still believed the judge had silenced the most important evidence. Then she placed a small silver coin beside her legal pad and asked, "Officer, are you prepared to state under oath that no second recording existed?" Dalton looked at the silver coin beside Renee's legal pad, then at the jury. "No second recording existed to my knowledge," he said. Renee did not challenge him. She placed a second coin beside the first. The faint click against the wood carried farther than it should have in the quiet courtroom. "Did you access the department evidence server after your shift ended that night?" Dalton answered without hesitation. No, a third coin appeared. Thomas Keene rose. "Your Honor, counsel is using objects to dramatize testimony." Judge Hart studied the small line forming beside Renee's notes. "Dr. Whitaker, the court will not permit theatrics. They are only markers, Your Honor." "Then keep them silent." Renee inclined her head. She turned back to Dalton. "Has anyone ever used your account without your knowledge?" "Not that I am aware of." "That was not my question. Have you ever reported unauthorized access to your account?" Dalton shifted slightly. "No." Renee placed the fourth coin down without sound. Caleb watched her with growing understanding. She was not proving the hidden file yet. She was building a record around every explanation Dalton might offer after the file appeared. Keene understood it too. "Officer Dalton has already testified about his credentials," he said. "This is repetitive." Judge Hart looked toward Renee. "How many more questions?" "Two, Your Honor." The judge allowed her to continue. Renee folded her hands. "Did you ask Marcus Lee or any other systems employee to alter, conceal, restrict, or remove any body camera recording connected to Caleb Turner's arrest?" Dalton's expression hardened at the sound of Marcus's name. "No." Renee set down the fifth coin. At the back of the courtroom, Olivia Grant lowered her eyes to her telephone and typed 2 words. "Threshold complete." The message traveled to the federal marshal waiting beyond the doors. Renee asked her final question. "Is the written report you signed a full and accurate account of everything that happened after you received the updated suspect information?" Dalton looked toward Keene. Keene gave no signal, but his stillness carried a warning. Dalton faced the jury again. "Yes, my report is accurate." Amanda Price's fingers paused for less than a second before recording the answer. Renee placed no sixth coin on the table. Instead, she closed her legal pad. 5 answers. 5 pads sealed. The courtroom remained quiet enough for Caleb to hear the ventilation system above the jury box. Judge Hart asked whether Renee had further questions within the admitted evidence. "One document, Your Honor." She lifted a single printed image from the silver case and handed it to the clerk. Keene objected before the clerk reached the bench. "This appears to be part of the unauthenticated server material. It is being shown only to the witness for identification," Renee said. Judge Hart reviewed the page, then permitted the limited question. The clerk carried it to Dalton. He looked down. The page contained a timestamp, an account identifier, and a digital credential signature. His face changed so subtly that most people would have missed it. Renee did not. "Do you recognize the account number?" she asked. Dalton kept staring at the page. "It resembles mine." "Resembles?" "I would need a systems expert." Renee nodded. "You will have one." The rear courtroom doors opened. Marcus Lee entered beside a federal marshal, carrying a sealed evidence package. Dalton turned toward him, and the confidence he had worn all morning finally disappeared. Marcus did not avoid his eyes. He walked to the front row and sat beside Olivia Grant. Renee looked at Judge Hart. "Your Honor, the authentication witness is now present." Keene stood slowly, no longer eager to object. Renee pointed toward the 5 coins. Officer Dalton has completed his testimony. I ask that every answer remain fixed in the record before the next exhibit is opened. Judge Hart ordered Marcus Lee to approach the witness stand while the federal marshal remained near the front row. Marcus moved carefully, carrying the sealed evidence package with both hands. He was 36, dressed in a plain gray suit, and looked more like a tired systems engineer than the person capable of changing the direction of an entire trial. After taking the oath, he stated his name, position, and responsibility for maintaining the police department evidence servers. Thomas Keene requested permission to question him before any exhibit was admitted. Judge Hart allowed a limited examination. Keene asked whether Marcus had ever made mistakes while managing digital files. Marcus said every large system experienced errors, but errors created diagnostic records. Keene asked whether a hidden video could result from routine maintenance. Marcus answered no. A maintenance process could delay access, but it could not issue the manual command recorded in Caleb Turner's case. Renee stood beside the plaintiff's table, watching Dalton rather than Marcus. Dalton kept his eyes on the printed audit image before him. The document showed his account number, the exact time of access, and a digital credential signature produced by his security token. Mr. Lee, Renee asked, did you create a forensic image of the original server? Yes. Did you follow the department preservation procedure? I followed the federal preservation order delivered to me that morning. The courtroom shifted at the word federal. Olivia Grant remained seated, her closed folder still resting across her knees. Marcus explained that he copied the relevant server partition through a write-protected system, calculated its digital hash, and sealed the result without altering the original data. He read the hash value from his report and confirmed that it matched the value printed on the evidence package. Judge Hart examined the seal, then looked toward Keene. He objected to the scope, but could no longer argue that the copy lacked a chain of custody. Renee handed Marcus the audit image Dalton had just reviewed. What does this entry represent? Marcus studied it. A successful login to the evidence server using Officer Dalton's account, password, and assigned security token at 2:11 in the morning. Could the system have created that signature by accident? No. Could another employee produce it without the token? Not under normal operation. Dalton rose from his chair. Keene immediately placed a hand near his own legal pad and told him to remain seated. Dalton ignored him. That is not what happened, he said. Judge Hart struck the gavel. Officer Dalton, sit down. Marcus looked toward the judge, then back at Renee. His voice became quieter. At 2:12, Officer Dalton called me at home. He said the second file contained information that would confuse the investigation. He ordered me to hide it from the visible case folder until he could speak with a supervisor. Dalton stepped away from the defense table. You are lying. Court security moved closer, but Renee did not retreat from the rail. She lifted the audit page. Then you should welcome authentication, she said. Marcus continued. He had obeyed the instruction because Dalton was a senior officer and claimed the change was temporary. The following morning, Marcus discovered that Dalton's report had been revised to say the camera stopped before dispatch provided updated information. He secretly preserved the server image because he feared the file would disappear completely. Dalton's face tightened as the jury turned toward him. You built this, he said to Renee. You came here to destroy me. I came here to preserve what you changed, she answered. Dalton moved toward the witness stand before Keene could stop him. The bailiff called his name. Judge Hart raised the gavel. For one suspended second, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Dalton reached the rail, and a sudden reckless motion broke the stillness. Chairs shifted. The bailiff closed the distance. Renee steadied herself beside the stand and kept her eyes on the red light of Dalton's body camera. Then her voice cut through the confusion, calm and exact. Do not help me up yet. Keep every camera exactly where it is. Do not help me up yet. Keep every camera exactly where it is. Renee's words stopped the courtroom more effectively than the gavel. The bailiff positioned himself between her and Dalton while a second court officer guided Dalton several steps away from the witness stand. Judge Hart ordered everyone to remain silent. Renee steadied herself beside the wooden rail, then looked toward Amanda Price. Please mark the exact time, the officer's words, his movement from the defense table, and the fact that his body camera is still recording. Amanda checked the courtroom clock and began typing. Every keystroke sounded deliberate. Dalton stood behind the court officer, his expression shifting from anger to uncertainty as he realized that the moment had become part of the official record. Renee raised one finger toward the clerk. Exhibit 62. Thomas Keene objected immediately. Your Honor, the exhibit has not been admitted. Then we will complete authentication now, Judge Hart said. She instructed Marcus Lee to remain under oath. Renee asked him whether the sealed forensic image had been created directly from the department server. Marcus answered yes. She asked whether the copy had been made through a write-protected system that prevented changes to the original data. Again, he answered yes. He confirmed that the digital hash printed on his report matched the hash generated when the evidence package was opened in court. Keene questioned him about the possibility of accidental modification, but Marcus explained that even a single altered character would produce a different value. The two values were identical. Judge Hart examined the report, the seal, and the preservation order. Exhibit 62 is admitted, she said. The clerk connected the evidence drive to the courtroom display. For several seconds, the screen remained black. Then the body camera recording began. Caleb appeared outside the convenience store in his gray college sweatshirt, standing several feet from Dalton with his hands visible. The time in the corner matched the end of the video previously shown to the jury. A dispatcher's voice came through the radio and stated that another officer had detained the actual suspect 2 miles away. The description was repeated: a man in his late 20s, red jacket, dark sedan. Caleb matched none of it. On the recording, Caleb asked whether he was free to leave. Dalton told him to remain where he was. The jury watched as Caleb explained that he had a class the next morning and had done nothing wrong. Dalton answered that people needed to learn that cooperation came before questions. No one in the courtroom moved. The recording continued for 9 minutes, showing that Caleb remained calm while Dalton extended the detention, searched his backpack, and wrote information into his notebook even after dispatch confirmed the mistake. The final minute captured Dalton speaking quietly to another officer. He needs to learn how to follow instructions. Caleb lowered his eyes. For nearly 2 years, official reports had described him as the problem. Now the missing minutes showed a young man trying to preserve his dignity while an officer chose authority over accuracy. Renee did not watch the screen. She watched Dalton. His shoulders lowered as every answer he had given returned against him. No second recording. No server access. No request to hide evidence. A complete report. 5 claims, each preserved in the transcript, each contradicted by the exhibit. Judge Hart ordered the recording paused. Renee lowered her raised finger. Your Honor, the witness testified that the updated suspect information arrived after his camera stopped. The authenticated recording proves that it arrived while the camera was active and before the detention continued. Keene remained standing, but no objection came. At the back of the room, Olivia Grant opened the folder on her lap. Renee looked toward the red light on Dalton's body camera. The officer had tried to silence the truth in open court. Instead, he had created one more recording that could never be hidden. Olivia Grant rose from the back row and walked toward the front of the courtroom with the folder open in her hands. Until that moment, Dalton had treated her like another observer. Now she identified herself as a special agent assigned to a federal public corruption investigation and presented Judge Hart with a signed preservation order covering Dalton's body camera, department telephone, report drafts, account records, messages, and every digital file connected to Caleb Turner's arrest. The room changed again. What had begun as a civil trial was no longer contained within one lawsuit. Judge Hart read the first page in silence, then ordered the bailiff to secure Dalton's body camera without stopping or altering the recording. Dalton looked down at the red light on his chest, as if he had only just remembered it was there. The device had captured his approach to the witness stand, his words, the judge's commands, and Renee's request to preserve the scene. This court will not permit any officer, attorney, witness, or employee to access or modify that recording, Judge Hart said. It will be transferred directly to the clerk and sealed. Thomas Keene requested a private conference, but Judge Hart refused. She stated that every order would be made in open court because the conduct had occurred in open court. Olivia handed the clerk a second document authorizing the immediate preservation of the evidence server and the seizure of Dalton's department-issued devices. Marcus Lee confirmed that remote access to Dalton's account had already been suspended. Dalton turned toward Keene and asked what he was supposed to do. Keene answered in a low voice that he should say nothing. It was the first advice Dalton followed all morning. Judge Hart then addressed the jury. She explained that the civil proceeding would be temporarily paused to protect the integrity of the federal investigation and to prevent either side from being unfairly affected by possible criminal evidence. She made clear that the pause was not a verdict. It was a safeguard. The jury was dismissed under strict instructions not to discuss the case or search for information about it. As they filed out, several jurors looked toward Caleb. None looked at Dalton. Olivia asked the court for permission to take custody of the sealed server copy after the clerk completed an independent inventory. Judge Hart approved the request. She also referred Dalton's conduct in the courtroom to another judge for review so that she would not become both witness and decision-maker. Renee watched without satisfaction. She had wanted the record protected, not the process bent in her favor. When Judge Hart asked whether she required medical attention, Renee said she wanted only a routine evaluation and a written record completed by courthouse staff. Then she requested that her own office have no role in any disciplinary decision involving Dalton. The evidence should stand without my position influencing the outcome, she said. Olivia gave a small nod. That sentence carried more authority than any demand for punishment could have. 2 court officers escorted Dalton toward the side door. He was not handcuffed, and no one shouted at him. His badge remained on his uniform, but it no longer seemed to command the room. Before he disappeared into the hallway, he looked back at the witness stand. 5 silver coins rested beside Renee's closed legal pad. 5 answers remained fixed in Amanda Price's transcript. Exhibit 62 remained frozen on the courtroom screen. By noon, the police chief placed Dalton on administrative suspension and removed his access to department systems. By evening, federal investigators had secured his devices and reopened the server records. He had stood that morning as a decorated officer, certain that his word would outweigh Caleb's life. He left knowing he would never return to that witness stand, that patrol car, or that unquestioned version of himself again. 6 months later, Caleb Turner walked across the Northbridge State University campus carrying the same backpack that had once been listed as suspicious property in Officer Mark Dalton's report. The university had restored his athletic scholarship, removed the disciplinary hold from his record, and issued a written acknowledgement that the arrest should never have been used to question his character. His coaches welcomed him back without ceremony because Caleb had asked them not to turn his return into a public spectacle. He wanted his place on the team, his classes, and the ordinary future that had been interrupted. The civil case ended with the city agreeing to compensate him, correct the official record, and establish independent review whenever body camera footage was missing or hidden. More important to Caleb, the final order stated in plain language that he had matched neither the suspect description nor the vehicle information provided that night. The truth no longer depended on whether strangers believed him. It existed in the record. The federal investigation moved more slowly. Investigators compared the hidden file, the revised report, the server commands, Marcus Lee's preserved image, and the recording from Dalton's active body camera inside the courtroom. Dalton was dismissed after an administrative hearing concluded that he had violated evidence, reporting, conduct, and truthfulness policies. Separate proceedings examined allegations of false statements, obstruction, record alteration, and contempt. Renee Whitaker played no role in deciding his discipline. She submitted her testimony, preserved her notes, and stepped away. When reporters asked whether she felt vindicated, she answered that accountability was not victory over another person. It was the restoration of rules that should have protected Caleb from the beginning. On a quiet Friday afternoon, Renee returned to Judge Hart's courtroom to collect a certified copy of the completed transcript. The jury box was empty. Sunlight crossed the polished floor, and the witness chair stood beneath the same microphone where Dalton had given 5 answers he could never take back. Amanda Price handed Renee the bound transcript and placed a small envelope beside it. Inside were the 5 silver coins the clerk had preserved with the courtroom materials. "The judge thought these belonged to you," Amanda said. Renee looked at them for a long moment. Each coin represented a denial. No second recording, no server access, no compromised credentials, no request to hide evidence, no incomplete report. Dalton had believed certainty could make those statements true. The record had proved otherwise. Caleb entered through the rear doors wearing his university jacket. He had come to thank Amanda for preserving every word. Marcus Lee arrived moments later, no longer employed by the police department, but working for a state digital ethics commission. The three of them stood near the witness stand without speaking about Dalton. They spoke instead about Caleb's classes, Marcus's new position, and the policy requiring two-person approval before evidence could be hidden from a case interface. Before leaving, Renee arranged the 5 coins in a straight line on the clerk's table. Caleb asked why she had used them. "Because people forget questions," she said. "They remember the sound of an answer becoming permanent." Judge Hart appeared at the courtroom door and watched them gather their things. No crowd remained. No cameras waited outside. The room had returned to its ordinary silence, but it was not the same silence that had once protected power. It was the silence left after truth had finished speaking. Dalton had believed authority could remove truth from the stand. Renee had needed only one motion to prove that truth had already taken the oath.